In the underworld of elite dogs, where only the strongest survive and legends are forged in the heat of combat, Mr. Hughes emerged as a true myth. Their pit bulls were not just animals, they were perfect machines of strength, speed and intelligence. Each of them was the result of years of dedication, study, and an almost supernatural obsession with excellence. They said that their dogs never lost, that a look was enough to feel the brutal energy that emanated from them. But what few knew was that behind the fame and the ring, Mr. Hughes hid a secret with these built dogs. Now, your interview will be public with all the victories, tragedies, and the price of being the best, where glory is as fierce as the animals themselves. The Old Man on the Mountain, Lester Hughes. In December 1989, I got married, and a few days later, I took a trip south on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So I went to visit a friend, who was very respected in dog fighting. Even though we didn't know the Camino, we had no problems getting there. On the side of the road, there was a creek, and on the other side of the creek, we saw what we were looking for. It was a large written sign. The Old Mountain Man Kennels. American Pit Bulldogs. This was the house of Lester Hughes, a man who, in the words of Tom Garner, it is a living encyclopedia about the American Pit Bull Terrier. Mr. Hughes lived for all 60-8 years in the mountain. When we got out of the car, we noticed a very cold place, more than we lived. On the left was the house of Mr. Hughes. He greeted us at the door. He projected calm and self-confidence. But the intensity of competitiveness was still in it. He introduced us to his wife, Evelyn, and his 2 children, Christine and Cole. Then he put on a coat, and also the Western-style hat. That was your trademark. We went to the yard. He had about 20-5 dogs. On our right, along the bank of the stream, there was a row of kennels. There was the dogs, and the puppies of Mr. Hughes. The kennels were well done. Beside it was about 1 meter and 80 centimeters. The door was in the center, and they were half a meter from the ground. In the kennel there was a little house, for each dog. In the little house there was a door on the side, which allowed instant access, either to a dog with puppies, or a sick dog. The drinker was automatic, and had a tray for built-in food. The best feature of these kennel is that each one is raised by a wood. Mr. Hughes throws water with a high-pressure hose, wipes the boards, and is ready. At that time, the dogs that were there were Holly, who is a daughter of the champion Jeep Rom of Gene Honey. Black Mert, a daughter of great champion Outlaw de Groves. Baby Jane, a very good Crenshaw Screamer daughter. And some puppies of the creation of Eli III, with Midnight Cowboy. In front of the kennel there was a building, which we saw as soon as we arrived. We were surprised to find that the building had heating, electricity, and running water. Inside the building consists in a small office, a warm delivery room, a bathroom, and a main room with carpet, which was the place of a lot of bulldog history. The back door gave a covered area over the stream. There was a number of narrow bridges. They were catwalks that crossed the stream. Behind the building, the stream is divided into 2 arms, and then he joins, forming a small stone island. And on this island, on both sides of the stream, there were several bulldogs, which were barking and running from side to side. They were in air cables, and trying to get our attention. Each dog had a little house. The houses were waterproof, and also far from the cold. And some had a barrel, which was partially embedded on the floor, by the river. The dogs had fresh water from their own stream. They felt at home. They jumped from side to side in the rock water. The dogs of Mr. Hughes was in perfect health. Among them were the Long Wordo dog, a son of the same blood as Champion Jeep, who proved to be a great producer. Daisy, who was the daughter of Champion Jeep Rom, with the female Great Champion Miss Rage. Had Bandit, who was crossing the Great Champion Outlaw with the female RC Molly. Lil Bill Jr., who is the son of Lil Bill, with female Sheena. In addition to a variety of young dogs of great selection. Mainly Eli, crossed with the Rascal, Buster, and Cowboy strains. This was the first of many times we visited the Old Man of the Mountain. We are honored to know a man, who is truly one of the dinosaurs in Pitbull, and we are grateful for the opportunity to learn from him. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes were very generous to us. He welcomed us into his home, and we created a friendship. Mr. Hughes was involved with bulldog wrestling for 45 years. Although he became known in dogfighting 20 years ago. He became known in the 70s as the Old Man of the Mountain. He has seen many dogs fighting, and been part of many of those great dogs. He is not a man who brags about his achievements. Not even the kind of guy who talks bad about other dogmen. He doesn't get involved in any gossip, which are generally common in the dog fighting world. He comes from a time when, to close a deal, it was a handshake and a word. Mr. Hughes told us.
Once, a few years ago, some boys came from Bronx from New York. They wanted to buy an adult dog. They didn't have enough money to buy the dog they wanted. So I let them take the dog, and send me the money later.
Mr. Hughes shook his head and smiled.
Everyone told me that I would never receive it again. But the rest of the money arrived by the post office of New York. And just as they had promised.
He has a keen eye for dogs. And also a good perception of their behavior. We heard that Mr. Lester could analyze a dog in 5 to 10 minutes. And it would take anyone 1 hour. We start to value his opinion about a dog much more than our own. We saw him observe what appeared to be a good dog in action. And when we asked him about his opinion, he simply stated that in another 10 minutes he would have stopped. Or after seeing a young dog not fighting well, he tells the owner, wait another month, and try again. Many dogs that have come close to being discarded at 18 months of age. They became fast-track dogs. With a little more time to mature. And this was noticed, thanks to your wisdom. Mr. Hughes' philosophy is that everyone will give up. Some will give up sooner, and others will give up later. He also taught us a lot about why dogs give up. He saw the old champion Rascal lose a fight, and then win several other fights. And he said this about the defeat.
It was a dropout because of the heat. Rascal was not afraid of the other dog. In fact, when they calmed him, he was struggling to find his opponent. And it makes sense that a dog can't get back to the fight. Because your senses are starting to fail due to heat, serious injuries, exhaustion or shock. And it shouldn't be badly seen. It is not the same dog, which for the reason of being afraid of his opponent.
We asked him what he thought of today's dogs, compared to before, from the time he started in the dogs fight. He told us that the overall quality of fast-track dogs. Today it is considerably larger than 30 or 40 years ago. And that today there are much more dogs, with amazing skills. With a hard mouth, and with gameness out there. He also told us that the way gameness is seen has changed, especially with regard to cold dogs. Cold was not a term used by dogmans 40 years ago. A dog was gameness or mutt. Mr. Hughes said that many creations were interrupted in this way of thinking.
I started fighting dogs when I was still a teenager.
The Lord Hughes began. We were sitting in the kitchen, with him and his wife. And we asked how he started with the bulldogs. He said.
At that time, everyone had dogs, and there were many fights here. I had a large collie dog then, supposedly a pure wood. But I believe it was a mestizo, with a bulldog because he had a big head, and weighed about 20-9 pounds. His name was Jack. We walked with him all over county. He had hit almost every dog in the area. One day, my uncle and I were sitting with Jack, right on the river bank. At that time, it was more a trail than a road. Anyway, after a while, a man appeared on the road with a short-haired dog. He was from Tennessee. And we had heard that his dog was a fighter, and was really evil. He went down the road to a rural store, and then when he was coming back, he saw us sitting there with our dog. We were looking at him, so he shouted. Boy, hold your dog. This is a very bad dog of mine. My uncle and I looked at each other, kind of smiling, and my uncle shouted back. I think this one knows how to take care of himself. Then he repeated, "Hold his dog, this one will hurt him, if they fight." So I put my hand on Jack's neck, as if to hold it. The man passed us, I waited until he was about 6 meters away. So I let go of Jack's neck and said, "Take, Jack." And Jack was, but it was a mistake Jack made.
Mr. Hughes shook his head, and a rare smile appeared on his face.
I couldn't see the dog because of the dust cloud. But when we could see, Jack was on his back. The other dog held well on the knee, and Jack started to cry a little. It didn't take long, and Jack did nothing but cry. After the man took his dog from the poor Jack. I asked him what the kind of that dog was. It took 6 months before I got a bulldog. I don't know if they were very good, but they won a few backyard fights. If any of them gave up, we would just put them back on their chain. And then we'd say he'll do better next time. Bulldogs were very rare at that time. I got my first bulldogs from a man in Tennessee. The man I met that day with Jack introduced me. We had some terrible fights, and the only conditioning the dogs did. He was supposed to go hunting with us in the forest. At that time, we had not heard of treadmills. He told me, he's a pit bulldog. So that was the first pit bulldog I saw.
Mr. Hughes told us that when he began to mark serious fights with dogs, that most struggles were rules of the old country. In your own words.
We used to let them fight until the dog stopped, or the owner caught his dog. These were the rule of our time.
One of the first dogs he put to fight was the old dog Ranger. He is the son of Cotton Bullet. It was against some people from Smithfield.
When I showed up with my dog, no one really knew me. They had money. They wore rings that looked worth my house, and gold tie clasps. I didn't know if they were willing to accept the amount I had to bet. Then a guy came over and supported me, his name was Whitey something. He asked me about my dog. And then he spoke, "Gentlemen, any of you who wish to bet. Come here, and let me know your name and who you are." Some of them just looked on with contempt. As if to say, "Do you think you have that much money?" Then he reached into his pocket, took out a wad of bills. They were $100 bills. Then he said, "If that's not enough, I have more in my other pocket. And if that's not enough, I have more in the trunk of my car." Ranger won the fight quite easily in 58 minutes. And Whitey had all those men lined up to pay him when it was all over. The fight was set up by a man named Hicks. Huey brought me a dog, which he wanted to fight against these same people. When the dog arrived, he weighed about 41 pounds. We competed with a weight of 35 kilos, according to the old country rules. Before the fight ended, I found out that the dog we were putting to fight, I had already lost 6 months ago, to this same opponent. That dog's name was Duke. He was big and black, Big Boy's son. Hicks' owner said the only way the fight would happen was in the old country style. Evelyn trained him for that fight.
So Mrs. Hughes spoke.
He was so big he could drag me, but he was trained in obedience. And he would stand still as you put the collar on it. Then he jumped on the treadmill, and ran like crazy. He looked like a calf. He was so well trained that a woman or child could deal with him.
So Mr. Hughes spoke.
Except when it was time to take him to the ring. It took William Cable, Bruce King and me to put him in the ring.
Mrs. Hughes smiled.
The 3 of them had to carry it, one in the middle, one on the back and one on the front. And the one in front had to hold his head tightly. If his head were let go, he would bite you. He made a screaming noise in the back of his throat that was scary to hear.
Mr. Hughes continued.
LP conditioned and manipulated the other dog, and boy, there was no way I was going to win. They were quite confident and their dog had already beaten this dog. They had all kinds of chances in the fight. We let them go, and Duke went across and held that dog. I don't think there was a hair from that other dog touching the ground.
Mrs. Hughes added.
That old dog stayed there more than 3 hours. How long is you aware? It took so long that they wanted to let Lester leave and change coach. But the only reason Duke was fighting was because the Lester was talking to him and encouraging him. If he had gone, he would have gone too. At one point, the LP said,
"Why don't you get out of your dog and let him leave?"
So I said okay, I'll get out of his way and took a step to the side. That dog came to where I was and looked at me, then looked at the other dog that was lying down. Then he came back and grabbed that dog's throat and began to shake again. Again the Duke was fallen, and the Lester was on his knees with his face turned to the Duke. He was talking to him.
So Mrs. Hughes continued.
Duke got up again, Lester spoke to him. The LP turned to the crowd and said,
"I don't know what Mr. Hughes is telling this dog."
Mr. Hughes and Duke won the fight in 3 hours and 20-5 minutes. The other side decided that his dog was dead and gave up.
The old ranger, I don't know how many he won in the old country rule. But he defeated everything we put against him. That son of a bitch would attack me if I didn't do what he wanted. I remember one time I put him on a 20-foot chain behind the barn. As I approached him, I noticed he had a wild look in his eyes. I wasn't sure if he meant to be friendly or bite me. But when I got closer, he came at me. It jumped towards my face. At the last minute, I turned around. Evelyn had given me a new winter coat for Christmas. The ranger bit the collar of his coat, and tore off a large piece. He started shaking as hard as he could, that piece of coat that he tore. The second time I knocked him out, and I thought I killed him. When he came to, he was as friendly as a puppy. I believe that dog had flashbacks or something. Most of the time he would love me to death. But every now and then he would look at me like, "Who the hell are you?" Once I came with a bucket of food. At that time the buckets were made of metal. He advanced on me again. I swung that bucket around and hit him in the head so hard, I thought I had killed him again. He woke up and acted as if nothing had happened. Another time, I was working with him on what we called the merry-go-round. I put a chicken in a cage for him to chase. He ran so fast that he broke his training equipment. I took it right away, but he wanted to take it anyway. Man! We had a terrible fight that day.
Ms. Hughes added.
You could never turn your back on the ranger, at least I never did. You never really knew what was going on in his head. Remember that night when the ranger released? And that jumped into a dog near the river.
Mr. Hughes nodded.
It was pitch black and the middle of winter. Ranger almost drowned the other dog. I went into the stream and almost froze to death, trying to separate the dogs.
To this point, Mr. Hughes was smiling and laughing as he remembered Duke and Ranger. Suddenly he was serious again.
I didn't usually see much danger in a dog that was cruel. I knew a bulldog could hurt a man, but I don't think I realized how bad it was. I was not afraid of one. But now I am much more cautious with a men devourer. They can really hurt you, even kill you. Honestly, I don't believe an adult man could kill a 30-pound bulldog without a gun if he decided to attack you.
I asked Mr. Hughes about some of the famous pit dogs he saw fight. And how he would classify them, starting with Champion Rascal. He told me.
Dude, he was a bulldog. He won 5 official fights, and several others out of jail. It just can't be recognized as a great champion because it lost its first fight. I arbitrated that fight, it was very hot on the day, the rascal warmed and did not come back. But he didn't give up fighting, that is. Did not retreat. I've seen a lot of dogs do this, and many people shout that he's a mutt. But if the dog does not return, it does not necessarily mean that it is a mutt. There have been a lot of defamed dogs like mutts and they weren't. I have never seen a dog that could put Rascal back, even the one to whom he lost, died less than half an hour after the fight. I put a dog against him once. A really hard dog of big boy origin. I had never seen any dogs make him back off. Rascal made him back, and kept him for more than an hour until he gave up. Rascal fought with any style, but liked to work the bite on his head. He could overcome any fighter style that was placed against him. I think there are so many good dogs coming. Many of origin of the Rascal champion, even as to any other dog, created in the last 20-5 years. The Stompanato dog should be an example of this, son of the same father, and his mothers were crossed in the same way. I know the two strains seem to do very well together. Susie is the daughter of the Stompanato and produced some good dogs when she was crossed with Rascal Jr. Stompanate was a well-built and beautiful dog. I never saw him fighting actually, and I heard two different stories about him. One was that he had won twice in Mexico, and the other was that he was cold. I don't know if it was cold or not, but a lot of good bulldogs today carry the blood Stompano. Buster was another dog that I heard two stories about. One story said he won, the other said he was cold. What I heard John Chavar say, bought it from Maurice Carver, for a fifth of whiskey. He was with Buster for 2 weeks or 2 months, something like that, and then he died. Lapace also got a dog, and the same thing happened as Buster, at approximately the same time he died. I bred Buster when he was very old, but no puppies were born. He certainly produced some good dogs. His daughter, Grand Champion Miss Rage, killed all the dogs she fought except one. But the second time she fought the one who survived, she also killed him. Midnight Cowboy was a small black dog, short and somewhat arched. He was a very good dog, one of the best in my opinion. I would put him in the top 10 of all the dogs I've ever seen fight. He bit hard, not as hard as I've seen before, but hard enough to win. I saw Chivo kill Billy Collins' dog in less than 30 minutes. He really was a bulldog. I would say he was also one of the best I've ever seen.
Mr. Hughes also named the great champion Boomerang as one of the best. But he thinks the fiercest dog he has ever seen was the great champion Zebo.
Champion Homer was a tough biter, but Zebo was tougher than him. He bit so hard, to the point of killing all his opponents. They claim that Greaser is not dead. It is not known if he disappeared, or if he was retired for breeding, but I never heard from him again. It wouldn't have been a difficult fight if Greaser hadn't been 1.5 kilos heavier. I saw the famous dog Tramp Red Boy, he beat me once. He was good, and a solid bulldog. Some people say, that he couldn't bite hard. And he only won because he didn't have any real competition. Huey Hicks brought me a big bitch. He wanted to put up a fight against Red Boy. So I put. The first 45 minutes of the fight, it looked like she was going to kill Red Boy. Then he started biting her head very hard. And he bit hard. He made her stop, in 1 hour and 17 minutes. This was the only time I pitted a female against a male. And the fight wasn't mine. Even back then, there was no pitting male against female. And I'm not in favor of that. It's not fair to either of them. There are times when a male will not fight so much with a female. Most of the time, the female would have an advantage because of this. And the female will not always fight a male. Not how much she would fight another bitch. This is just my opinion.
Mr. Hughes also saw the great champion Honey Bunch fighting, and told us.
I think she was one of the best dogs I've ever seen. In her first fight she beat a dog I conditioned and handled, and she killed him. I refereed her next match against a bitch named Bonnie, and she killed that bitch too.
When I asked about the great champion Beau de Finley, I was surprised by the answer. I asked. Have you ever seen Beau fight? Was he a gamey dog? He answered.
No, he refused to fight again in front of 175 people. When he lost his second fight, to the dog Vindicator. I wouldn't say he was a stray. In fact, Vindicator was probably the only dog that could defeat him. Beau kept biting Vindicator's head for the first 15 minutes or so. He had a good mouth, and he was biting hard. But then, Vindicator started biting hard on Bo's front paws. He bit one paw, then went to another paw, and then back to another, and Bo started to cry a little. LP bet Bob $100 that he wouldn't fight again. LP got it right and Bo didn't fight again. He didn't cross the line, in his courtesy scratch. When he refused to fight, I told Bob. Walk to the other corner, and see if it will continue. He did so, but Bo just looked towards the corner of the ring. Bo won 5 or 6 more fights after giving up this time. I didn't see Grand Champion Snake fight, but James Crenshaw told me he was one hell of a dog. Champion Jeep was a good game dog, but I've seen better dogs than him. I don't want to take away from him, it's just that he simply wasn't the greatest dog of all time, as some people say he was. He was a real gameness. Any dog that fights for 3 hours and 45 minutes can be sure he is the real deal. I know some people said that he couldn't be beaten in the fight, that he was ahead from the beginning. But one thing is a fact, he had already proven in the fight against the dog Wiener, that he could come from below to win. I didn't see this fight, but I heard that Weenie confused the Jeep for a good part of the fight. Weenie was a funny dog. He was a dog tall, and 2 dogs long. I've seen some dogs like that, who could really bite hard. They had this trait going for them.
We asked Mr. Hughes, who was the dog that had the strongest bite? Without being Grand Champion Zebo. And what was the hardest biting bitch he saw?
The fiercest dog I've seen in the last 10 years was Champion Homer. As far as I know, no dog has spent half an hour with Homer and survived. He also killed several dogs before an official fight. The dog I saw with the strongest bite is Grand Champion Spooky. She is the daughter of the dog Homer and the female Susie. I raised Spooky and educated her before selling her to Ricky Jones. At that time I got rid of many dogs. I believe I made a wrong assessment. When I test-fighted Spooky, they all looked bad. Spooky was so good, she made all dogs look bad. The only dog I saw hit her head on. It was a bitch that Bobby Hall and Jeanette bet against. She fought Spooky for over an hour. Spooky took a nasty bite to her head. But she was biting her breast most of the time. Spooky stopped the bitch. She refused to fight, at 1 hour and 42 minutes. I heard people saying she didn't want to go back to fighting, but she could have. The first time I saw Zebo, he bit me.
Said Mr. Hughes.
William Cable and I went to Lonzo's house to see his dogs. Lonzo had his dogs tied up in a narrow path. If you stepped to the side, the dogs could catch up to you. I started walking down the path, I was behind Lonzo. I stopped and asked. Can any of these dogs catch us? He spoke. No. And I said there was no way the dogs would bite me. So we continued walking. We took a few steps, when suddenly a black dog stretched the chain and bit my arm. I swung my fist, and punched him in the jaw, and he fell to the ground. That was the first time I laid eyes on Zebo. Willie Brown was there with his wife and daughter. He and Lonzo were testing a lot of dogs. They rolled a Willie bitch into Lena. Lena was Zebo's sister. Soon after they rolled Vindicator against Zebo. It was a very short test. The way they were hurting each other, it was impossible to stay any longer. Without them killing themselves. The Vindicator was punishing Zebo's front paws. Zebo was hurting Vindicator's nose. Zebo was making holes in Vindicator's snout, the size of my little finger. The blood drained everywhere. Lonzo preferred the Vindicator, but I asked Willie which dog he liked the most. And he said, he had seen the two fighting before, and he liked Zebo more. I really liked Zebo, but I didn't buy Zebo that day. I came back after a few months, and Lonzo had rolled the Zebo in a 38-pound dog. Zebo's shoulder was very injured.
Mrs. Hughes added.
His leg was hanging, it looked like it had been ripped off.
I bought the Zebo and took it home. William Cable took him to the vet. Zebo had its shoulder rebuilt. The surgery cost $70-5, at the time it was a lot of money. Lonzo let me take Zebo on time. I paid for him. He still says that I still owe Zebo to him. But I paid him every penny of Zebo. I then came back on Lonzo, and bought 4 female puppies. They were Dog's daughter Mike with the female Angie. And I paid installments too. But I stopped paying $20 of each puppy, because Willie Brown told me I wouldn't see the dog's rolls. That Lonzo would not pay for pedigree, and that was the story that I owe $80 for Lonzo Pratt. Of the 5 dogs I bought from Lonzo, 3 were very good, and take the hat for it. Every time you buy 5 dogs from a man, you are more likely to get 5 mutts than 3 good dogs. Of these females, one won 2 fights, and the other died in a kennel fight. Of the 2 who didn't work, one got cold and the other fought 15 minutes and gave up. After Zebo was all healed, I bet with Zebo. Your first fight was easy. The fight was against a friend of mine, with whom I had agreed with 18 pounds. The dog he brought was about 16 pounds, Zebo weighed about 18 pounds. Zebo killed him in 17 minutes. Bob Finley had a 2-fight winner named Pete. We bet on 19 pounds. Pete had won his fights with a greater weight. Zebo reached 18.5 pounds, which was already very heavy for him. Zebo was a good, strong and persistent dog. Zebo killed Pete in 26 minutes. The next one was against my service friend again, and it was a very good fight. Zebo won in about 30 minutes and the dog also died. This dog was real gameness, he would have returned to the fight if he could. I can't believe that man moved more with bulldogs after that. He was a very nice man. And I'm not going to say he's a deputy sheriff or anything like that. But he is at the top of the law. Junior Bush called and said he had a fight for Zebo in Alabama. Against a guy called Esslinger, who was really angry with us at the time. We let go, and when that guy saw what was happening, I saw that he kind of felt like he had fallen for a scam. He walked over to where I was and said, "That dog could kill a dog, couldn't it?" And I responded, "Yes, he recently killed 2. And if you don't get yours, it will kill you too." And Zebo won the fight in 23 minutes. Dave and Roger Adams saw Zebo the day he fought in Alabama. Dave looked at him, and pointed to his back and asked me, "Why doesn't he have any scars there?" I responded, "What I do know is that no dog hit his rear end." He called me after the fight, wanting to buy Zebo. And I told him I didn't want to sell the dog. Then he made me an offer. And I said a price, which I thought he wouldn't pay for the dog. And so the matter ended. The next morning I was having coffee. When I looked out the window, I saw Dave Adams parking his car in the yard. And he had come to get Zebo. He wanted to take Zebo off the chain alone. Soon after I saw him moving away from his chain. Zebo almost bit him and kicked him out. I put Zebo inside their car. They didn't bring a carrier. When they left, Zebo had already jumped into the front seat and was looking out the window. I wondered if they would arrive in Ohio, with the perfect face.
Mr. Hughes shook his head, laughing, and continued.
They bet against the dog Greaser. Which I believe I won 4 times. And there was a good story behind it, each side trying to define the other side. I was supposed to watch this fight, but my car broke down and I went home. At 3 in the morning the phone rang and it was Dave Adams. Due to the time I thought Zebo had given up. He said, "You won't believe what old Zebo did." And before he could say anything else, I told him. "Well, I like it, send it to me if you don't want it." Then he told me that Zebo moved up to a heavier category and won the fight. He won the fight in just under 2 hours. After that, Zebo bit the son of Sir Dave Adams, and hurt the boy. I saw the boy's face, and Zebo really bit hard. So Dave Adams sold the Zebo to a guy named Johnson. Zebo won 2 more fights after that. One against his nephew, Cush's son, he won that fight in 18 minutes. Zebo was the strongest dog I've ever seen. He was an excellent breast biter. Nobody managed to take Zebo out of the ring. And if he went against him in the ring, the dog would certainly be so weak, due to the damage Zebo had done, that he wouldn't do anything else against him. Zebo shook his opponent's front paws so much that the dog seemed not to touch the ground. He would adapt to any style of fighter. If the dog was mouth-biting, he certainly wouldn't stay there for long. Zebo would bite so hard that the opponent would choose to try another fighting style. When I bought Zebo, his teeth were flat, but they were so long and thick, he looked like my little finger, and that's no exaggeration. He would kill a dog without a drop of blood. I don't remember seeing much blood in any of his fights. I don't think there would be much competition in Zebo's fight with Greaser if Greaser didn't have such a weight advantage over Zebo. They say he survived and was retired to produce, and perhaps he was. But I never heard from him, or any of his puppies, again. Zebo would bite you or he would bite a stranger. It wasn't always, but there were times when he wasn't friendly. If when you got close to him, his eyes were very wide and round. The only way you wouldn't get bitten was to get away from him. When he bit me, he didn't bite me and let go. He would bite you like he was fighting, he would hold and shake. Once a young man from South Carolina was here looking at some friend's dogs. I think he weighed about 120 kilos, he was very big and muscular. We started looking at the bulldogs, he went straight to Zebo. At the time, Zebo was in the current, close to the apple tree. I screamed. "Don't touch this dog, it will bite you." Then he answered me. "I make a living from training dogs, and not. There is a dog that I cannot pet." So I said. "Well, you can't pet that one." He looked at Zebo and said. "This little dog is friendly, look how his tail is wagging." I said. "He's just anticipating how much he'll enjoy biting you." Me and the other guys continued up the hill towards the other dogs. We didn't even walk 3 meters and we heard a man scream. The man was holding his arm up, and Zebo was hanging on his arm, and shaking. I had to get some wood to get Zebo out. I believe there was no way that man could escape Zebo. Even though he's big, Zebo would definitely knock him down.
We all laugh and Mrs. Hughes said.
Zebo was our house dog, before we had kids. He rode in the car with us. I would put him in the back seat, but he would always go in the front. He would jump on my lap in front, and put his head in the window. He kept clicking his jaw, in the same way as when they are excited or nervous. Sometimes he scared me by doing that, with his head close to my face, doing that and shaking. I threw him in the back seat, but he jumped forward again. One day we were in the car, I was throwing Zebo back and he was jumping forward. Lester was so mad at both of us that he hit the brakes, turned around, and headed home. He told us both to get out of the car, and he went alone. You couldn't reach out your hand to touch me, before Zebo took your finger.
Mr. Hughes continues.
I was walking with him in the parking lot, before the fight in Alabama. Junior Bush approached to tighten William Cable's hand. When their hands met, Zebo took their hand, did not press much to take it and let out. Mr. Hughes asked his wife. "Remember what fight was that?" "The one I brought Zebo home, and put him in the barn room." "And did he rip everything and ate the phone?"
Ms. Hughes responded.
I don't remember, but I remember when you brought him from a fight, with his head and his eyes swollen, his head looked like a melon and his eyes were almost closed. We had a black kitten, he was somewhere indoors. Lester carried Zebo inside. We thought Zebo could not see anything, but as soon as Lester sat him, Zebo got up. Zebo was running after the cat, and me behind him, trying to get it before he took the cat.
Mr. Hughes added.
Another time, we were coming back from a fight with Zebo. Everyone was asleep except the driver. We didn't think Zebo would do anything, as he was injured, so we thought he would rest. When we woke up, Zebo had chewed the leash and eaten part of it. He also chewed on my belt while I was sleeping and ate part of it. William Cable was amused, until he started looking for his sweater coat to wear. He had an expensive sweater, the ones with leather patches on the elbows. Zebo ate all the leather and ate the collar too. William stopped laughing immediately when he found the sweater. Once I had not bet on one of Zebo's fights. I gave all my money to Evelyn to bet. I knew no one would bet against me, and you know how people are. If they see a dumb woman trying to bet, they will accept the bet.
Mrs. Hughes continued.
I would never bet on a fight, and I didn't know how to bet. Everyone was making the bets, and I stood. Zebo won in less than half an hour, and I had not bet on anything.
We asked Mr. Hughes what Zebo produced while he was his. And in his opinion, what was the reason that Zebo was known for not producing well? He replied.
I didn't cross Zebo, with no bitch outside while he was here. But I crossed with 2 or 3 dogs here. I crossed him with a Bruce King bitch, and we had some good dogs. 1 was poisoned, 1 hanged themselves and 2 accidentally drowned. I believe they would have been winners. I crossed him with lonesome, exemplary dogs I could never find. They were all the size of Zebo. Gator was one of them, and he was the most similar to Zebo. I put him to fight his brother, Blue, who was also a good dog. Gator ended Blue, he literally pulled out part of the muzzle, teeth, bones and everything. Blue did not recover and had to sacrifice him. I stopped with Gator, because he released and took a chained dog near the river. I had a broken leg at the time and couldn't get there fast enough. Gator broke his teeth in this accident. I believe there was another good in the litter, I named Little Zebo. It was a very good puppy that I sold to someone close to Lenore, North Carolina. But I lost contact with this one. I took 5 males of Zebo, which I thought would be really good dogs. But they never came to your feet. Unfortunately, they were a good percentage of cold dogs, which could not stand a bite.